like to start with the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, and welcome to our meeting. Kate, will you do a roll call, please?
Yes. Chair Tippett.
Here.
Vice Chair Anderson.
Here.
Commissioner Erickson.
Here.
Commissioner Benson.
Here.
And Commissioner Smallwood and Commissioner Costello are excused.
Okay, great. So we're just going to go ahead and follow along with our agenda. The first item of business that we have is reviewing the minutes of September 15th. Has everyone had a chance to look at those?
Yes.
Any additions or corrections?
You tell us.
I have two little ones, well, three little ones. Sorry.
Nothing major.
Nothing major. So on I don't know what page it is because I printed them out. I think on page 4, where it says Chair Tippett's identified that the applicant was, that should be present instead of represent. Do you see that?
Yep.
And then on the next page, last full paragraph, fork needs to be capitalized, American fork. Second sentence. And then development and the challenges that it presents, it needs to be put in before presents. Got it?
Got it.
Okay, those are my only changes. Anyone else have anything?
Nope.
Okay, let's go ahead and take a vote on those. We can do an oral vote. Everyone okay with the changes and accept the minutes?
Yes.
Yep.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. So we'll now move on to our public hearing matters. First of all, I want to explain how the meeting will work. The planning department will brief the commission, so someone from staff will do a presentation. We'll then ask the applicant to speak to the commission. We will then open the meeting up for public comments. We will ask the Midvale City Attorney after that to give us a brief outlook on what the commission needs to do with this, and then the commission will close the public hearing, and the commission will deliberate and do a motion and vote. Okay, so the first item is applicant Blake Anderson is requesting a conditional use permit for a monument sign for the Brown Apartments located at 8283 South Main Street, which is in the RM25 zone. Blake Anderson of Signorama Salt Lake City is the applicant. Midvale EAZ Business LLC is the owner. Jason Binks is a senior planner and will present on behalf of the city.
Chair, I think this is the wrong,
Is that not number 1?
the wrong agenda.
Is that? Oh, it is the wrong agenda. Sorry. How come I have this wrong agenda? Okay, never mind. So I do have, so it's the first one that I have wrong. So it's also a conditional use permit. Brandon Aquedo requests an amended conditional use permit approval in order to allow for a flat roof design for 3 twin homes located at 447-459 East Greenwood Avenue in the single-family residential duplex overlay zone. This was continued from our last meeting. So we do not need a city presentation, but we do need to see if Brandon is here. Brandon, do you want to come up and give us a little overview of what you're requesting?
Do you have anything to look at by chance?
We had them from our last meeting, but I'm not sure if we have it.
I brought the.
I do have the same slides I presented.
Okay, yeah, we
Okay.
might want to have those.
Yeah, if you want to pull up, I apologize. Somebody played a cruel joke in the last meeting. It was on tax day, so I wasn't able to make it. I was a little late. But if you have those plans, that would be helpful in kind of showing what I'm doing. So this project was previously approved. All I'm essentially doing is requesting to change the elevations, staying within the same site plan. All the previously approved flag lot basically, when you guys had met previously to discuss this, adhering to all the previously described regulations, no more than 25 feet. As a matter of fact, actually, this elevation change sort of benefits because the pitch roofs can go 28, and on these flats, we're not going more than 25. So essentially, just looking at an elevation change on the approved plans. And I'm happy to go through it with you. If you get those pulled up, I can show you.
Yeah, you have the.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't even see this. How does this work? Just next? Perfect, okay. So you guys are pretty familiar with the project. So these were the previously approved elevations, just sort of ordinary, kind of what everybody's doing, craftsman style. I'm a developer and builder, so I like architecture, and so I wanted to change the architecture a little bit. So these are the plans that we put together. Again, still fitting within the same rules that were previously granted, all the same setbacks, all the same requirements. I literally took the site plan and said, I just want to change the elevations. And so that's what we did. And I apologize, I wasn't really prepared for this presentation, but let me just read through this real quick. Yeah, elevation changes, all the previous minutes. Oh, let me go back. What did that say? Cash bond's already been paid. The home's already been demolished. We're pretty much ready for horizontal at this point. I was just waiting to get approval on the elevation changes, essentially. So you can see it's just going from that craftsman style to a more modern architecture that I think kind of fits in with where the city's going, and that's ultimately what my request is.
Okay. Any questions, commissioners, for the developer?
So one of the comments, and I didn't want to speak on it because I'm not a developer, I'm just sitting
Sure,
here.
sure.
There were some questions, because there were, I think, 2 or 3 groups of people that had comments.
I read the minutes from the last meeting, and I apologize again, I
Yeah.
missed it, but I did see that there was a little bit of hesitation with the change of architecture for the neighborhood. I'm assuming
Sure.
that's what you're referring to.
And some of it was, what exactly is a flat roof? And I could obviously speak to that, but I want you to explain, just so it's on record, about what a flat roof is, that it's not necessarily exactly flat, and that it will drain.
Yeah, so it has a membrane on top, and there will actually be an access to the top so that you can utilize that space. But the overall height can be no more than 25 feet, whereas the previous designs, the pitch could be up to 28 feet with the midline at 25 feet. So this actually caps out at 25, and so it is a flat roof, but it does have a membrane. There's a draining system that drains the water from the roof down like a traditional. I mean, these have no different. These pitch roofs have a gutter system. It's more of an internal gutter system for these flat roof designs. But it's that parapet up top is actually sort of deceptive. The roof of the ceiling is lower than that. So if you were to look at the rest of the plans, you would see it kind of drops down. So that's kind of a little bit higher than what the ceiling is beneath that. But ultimately, just a flat roof with a membrane on the top of it.
Sure, and I just wanted that on, record, so that the citizen that had concerns.
Sure.
That
Yeah.
that could be addressed.
Yeah.
Another concern was that this doesn't fit in necessarily with the neighborhood where all the other houses are pitched roofs.
Yeah.
And so that was a main concern. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, I do recognize that's a concern. Obviously, change is hard for a lot of communities, but ultimately, I feel like those craftsman-style homes, everybody's been building for the last 15 years. And so the homes I tend to build are a bit more modern, and so I kind of wanted this to fit in line with that. This is its own sort of if you kind of look back, this is its own sort of little area in and of itself. I do recognize it as a concern, but I don't think it's necessarily anything that's going to bring down the value of the neighborhood. If anything, my ultimate goal is to bring up the value of the neighborhood, and I don't think those craftsman-style homes will command as much of a value as this style of home will when I'm finished. And so that's really the outcome. The value of the land is so expensive right now, I have to try to maximize it, And yeah, so it definitely doesn't fit, but I've done this in multiple areas, and I've never had a neighbor come up to me when I'm done and say, this looks terrible. It's always like, this is beautiful. I mean, I think I do nice architecture. Maybe I'm biased, but I think it'll look nice when it's finished. And you'll, as you drive around the city, not just Midvale, you'll see similar styles going up in all sorts of communities, these type of more modern architecture, multifamily units. Honestly, I would like to stagger them a little bit more, but because of the setbacks, I'm sort of limited. So it will be a bit boxier than I was hoping, but it's one of the setbacks I'm sort of stuck with, sticking in that same site plan that was previously approved.
Thank you.
Commissioners, anything else for? Okay, then I think we'll go ahead and open this up for a public hearing.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Doesn't look like anybody's here. I motion that we close the public hearing.
I'll second.
It's been motioned and seconded. All in favor of closing the public hearing?
Aye.
Garrett, do you want to address what we're doing?
Thank you, Chair. So this is an administrative decision, which just means that you as a commission are looking to make sure that it meets all the requirements of our ordinance. If it meets the requirements of our ordinance, you are required to approve it. If there's anything that needs to be, needs to be addressed, that it's coming short, then you can approve with conditions, or if it violates our ordinance, that would be the only case that you could deny it.
Anyone have any comments?
Looks like it meets all the requirements.
Okay, we're open to a motion. Someone want to make a motion on this?
Somebody does.
You're looking for it?
I'm looking for it.
I move that we accept the proposal with, what is it? The, right,
Right here.
There you go.
Oh,
Right there.
There we go.
the two,
Is there no?
let's see, I move that we recommend the planning commission to approve the amended CUP for the Lennon Lane subdivision with the following conditions as outlined in the staff report.
I second it.
It's been moved and seconded. Okay, can we get a roll call vote, please?
Yes. Vice Chair Anderson,
Yes.
Commissioner Erickson,
Yes.
Commissioner Benson.
Yes.
Okay, we'll go ahead and approve that conditional use permit. Thank you very much. I can make sure I have the right stuff.
Why can't you?
I don't know.
Oh, he has some on. We're being
That's
bookended.
big writing.
Yeah, excuse me. Okay. Our next item is an applicant, Colin Thompson, is requesting a conditional use permit for approval of a duplex located at 135 East, 6980 South in the single-family residential duplex overlay zone. Elizabeth Arnold will present on behalf of staff.
Okay, yes, so this is a conditional use permit for a duplex located just right here, as you can see on the vicinity map. They provided a site plan that kind of shows the existing building that is there on the lot that will be retrofitted to have another unit in the basement. All parking will be provided off-street on the site, so that was shown there. Conditions of approval and a recommended motion are the same as included in your staff report.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone have questions? Okay, is the applicant present?
I heard that he was going to be present online.
Oh,
He was sick and was going to attend virtually.
Okay.
So.
No.
Okay. That's the last I heard.
Okay.
He actually has strep throat.
Ah,
Oh,
well then, we're glad he's not here.
Do we need to punt this then?
It's pretty straightforward. What do we need to do, Garrett? Do we need to move this, or can we go ahead and open it for a public hearing without our applicant?
That's a decision that you can make as a planning commission. I mean, there's nothing in our code that requires an applicant to be present.
I think we can go ahead and open this for a public hearing. This is pretty straightforward. Is there anyone here that would like to make a comment about this?
Careful, don't run up.
Go ahead and come up. And when you get up here, will you please state your name and address, please?
William Main, 6980 South, 85 East. I just wanted to know, apparently there's going to be additions to the house. Is it going to affect the residences in the neighborhood?
I don't think there's
And
any
what would the
additions.
net effect be of having a duplex there?
I think it's
As far
basement
as
and
what I can
upstairs.
see from the application, it's just making the basement an apartment and the upstairs, they're doing a duplex upstairs, 1 unit upstairs and 1 unit downstairs. There's no additions to the building.
Okay, that's all I need to know. Thank you.
Right, it says no new structures, so.
Is there anyone else that has any comments regarding this matter?
I move that we close the public hearing portion.
I second it.
It's been moved and seconded. Can we have a vote, please? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, okay. Garrett, I'm assuming that the same that you spoke of before applies to this?
Yes, Chair, thank you.
Okay. Does the commission need to discuss anything here? Okay, then let's go ahead and move forward with a motion.
I move that we approve the conditions, the conditional use permit for a duplex located at 135 East, 6980 South, consistent with the findings and conditions noted in the staff report.
I'll second it.
It's been moved and seconded. Kate, can we get a roll call vote, please?
Yes, Commissioner Erickson,
Yes.
Commissioner Benson,
Yes.
Vice Chair Anderson.
Yes.
Okay, that's been moved and seconded, and we will approve the conditional use permit.
It's gonna walk in.
Okay, so that takes us to item number 4, which applicant Jeff Eaves is requesting a conditional use permit approval of a duplex located at 7104 South, 300 East in the single-family residential duplex overlay zone. Elizabeth Arnold will present on behalf of staff.
Okay, so fairly similar application, another duplex, located just there in your vicinity map. Very similar situation, retrofitting the existing building to have a unit in the basement and a unit in the main floor. As you see, this is also a parking plan, shows all parking will be happening off-street on the site, so that will all be managed there. And then conditions of approval and motion have remained the same as included in your staff report.
Okay, thank you. Any questions, commissioners?
Not as yet.
Okay, can we go ahead and hear from our applicant?
So I really don't have anything additional to say about it unless you guys have any specific questions. I think Elizabeth did a great job.
Well, we don't at the present time, but let's see if anyone in the public has a question that you can answer. Okay,
Sure.
so let's go ahead and open this up for public hearing.
Let's go ahead and close that for public hearing.
You have to make a motion.
Like the motion that we close the public hearing.
I second.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, Garrett, again, it's basically the same.
Exactly
Not
the
Dustin
same. Yep.
Snow's here.
Dustin Snow has arrived, so he is now present.
Unaccounted for.
I will accept a motion on this.
I move that we approve the conditions, the conditional use permit for a duplex located at 7104 South 300 East, consistent with the findings and conditions noted in the staff report.
I second.
It's been moved and seconded. Kate, can we get a roll call vote?
Yes. Okay. Commissioner Benson,
Yes.
Vice Chair Anderson,
Yes.
and Commissioner Erickson.
Yes.
And do we want to ask for Commissioner Snow as he just came
He
in?
wasn't here for the whole
Okay.
thing, so let's
So we'll just go
not.
with that.
Okay,
But the next one, yes,
okay.
over one of these.
That has been approved. We'll go ahead and approve that conditional use permit. Thank you. That brings us to item number 5. Applicant Armando, is it Rosas? Is requesting a conditional use permit for a duplex located at 7591 Birch Street in the single-family residential duplex overlay zone. Elizabeth Arnold, you're up.
Dun, dun, dun.
Okay, very similar, a duplex, located just off First Street, as you will see in the vicinity map on the screen. Here is the site plan, again showing parking will all be maintained off-street as required. And again, conditions of approval and recommended motion are the same as included in your report.
Okay, thank you. Applicant, do you have anything you'd like to add?
I know.
Okay, and Garrett, this is basically the same.
I'd love to tell you differently, but it is the same.
But I have to ask, just in case. Okay, well, let's go, go ahead and open it for public hearing.
I move to close public hearing.
I second it.
It's been moved and seconded, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, will it be open for a motion?
I move that we approve with conditions the conditional use permit for the duplex located at 7591 Birch Street, consistent with the findings and conditions noted in the staff report.
I second it.
It's been moved and seconded. Kate, can we get a roll call?
Yes. Vice Chair Anderson,
Yes.
Commissioner Erickson,
Yes.
Commissioner Snow,
Yes.
and Commissioner Benson.
Yes.
We'll go ahead and approve that conditional use permit. Okay, that closes all of our public hearing matters. We'll now move on to planning commission discussion items. I'm not sure what the first one is, consent agenda.
What is that?
I don't know.
I can address that.
Thank you. 'Cause I was like, it's there, I don't know what it means.
And if I'm stepping out of bounds, Garrett can throw something at me or whatnot. But the city council, on their agendas, they will have what they call a consent agenda, where typically a consent agenda is if a project is very straightforward, meets all of the criteria, there's really not a reason to discuss it unless, of course, there's a public hearing associated with it, which then you would have a public hearing and close that. But typically, a consent agenda is a number of items on the agenda that are addressed with one motion that would approve those items or recommend approval of those. In other areas that I've worked, we've had those both for Planning Commission and City Council. Sometimes it can help speed up a Planning Commission meeting, especially if there are items that are more controversial or that are going to take more time. Any items on a consent agenda can be addressed fairly quickly, and then that allows us to move forward to other agenda items that do require more time to discuss. So we just wanted to run that by you and get your thoughts on that, if that's something you would be open to, and if so, we would make sure that we work with the attorney's office to make sure that we're not overstepping any bounds for any codes or rules that the city has for what may or may not be able to be on a consent agenda. So we just kind of wanted to get your feedback on that.
Sounds like it would streamline, make it easier
It
for
can.
our meetings.
What triggers it though? What?
Typically, if we've not received any comment on an item, if no one's called in, and we as staff feel that it could be on a consent agenda, then we would initially place it on one. The caveat is if any of you as planning commissioners or if anyone from the public came in and would like to address it, then it would be pulled off the consent agenda and we would discuss it on its own. So just because it's on there doesn't mean it has to stay on there. It can be requested to be pulled off and discussed on its own.
So what's the timeline for pulling it off and being like, I have concerns?
Where I've worked with this before, it can happen even at that meeting.
Okay.
Whether it's a member of the Planning Commission or a member of the public that comes in. I've had it for simple subdivisions that we as staff thought were simple. And then a member of the public came in and the chair would say, these are items on the consent agenda. Do any of the planning commissioners or do any members of the public have concerns on this? And if someone raised their hand and said, I'd like to discuss this, then that item would be pulled off the consent agenda and discussed on its own.
So do we have to announce that and say this item will be taken from the consent? Do you know what I'm saying?
Probably
So
do that,
we-
yeah.
Yeah.
So that would
So it's
basically
really
maybe
official.
fall under our minute approval. We could go right to the consent agenda and then ask if there was any comments or concerns about anything.
Yeah.
So-
Now, obviously, if there's a public hearing involved, we would open that anyway. But let's say tonight, these 3 items or even 4, let's just hypothetically say they were on a consent agenda. We would have opened public hearing for each one and then close that for each one, but then there could have been potentially one motion because all the findings and conditions were the same for each item,
Yeah.
so.
And I see that could be very beneficial, especially with the new development that we're doing, where we have all of those, and they're all the same, but they've been split up, so we have to go over every,
So if the developer is here, he's on the agenda as a consent, somebody speaks up, we squeeze him in that night, just like normal? He doesn't get bumped to the next meeting?
Because that'd be bad for the developer.
No, so if somebody came and wanted to just discuss an item, have it pulled off the consent agenda and discussed on its own, basically you could still make a motion for the items remaining on the consent agenda, and then
Okay.
the next immediate item would be the one that was pulled off.
And we just hear it like normal?
Yeah,
Okay.
It just kind of plucks it out of order and
yeah,
puts it.
and then
Okay.
just drops it down to the next item. We thought it might be good to just at least bring it up tonight, because again, all of the items tonight had the exact same findings and conditions. So those, in theory, may be able to be handled on some kind of a consent agenda with one motion addressing all three. But again, we would make sure that if we do that, we would work out the logistics with legal, make sure we're not stepping on any codes or anything like that, so.
I think our biggest concern is when we do have public comment, it's either a lot of public comment or none at all. So it's important that people feel heard.
For sure.
I think even though the conclusions are the same, I think it's still important that people voice those and that we
Yeah.
can address them.
And again, this isn't a way to try to silence any of the public
Right.
comment, it's just to streamline the agenda, especially if you've got a large agenda.
Sure.
Tonight, really, it probably didn't matter either way, but
And the developer doesn't get kicked off, so nothing
no,
really
they don't
changes.
get kicked
Right.
off unless
Right.
if you're discussing it and you decide to table it for
Yeah.
whatever reason. But no, they don't get kicked off just by, being pulled off the consent agenda. The feedback that I've had from the development community in other areas is they appreciate the consent agenda. We as staff let them know you're going to be on the consent agenda. And so, sometimes it's a time saver for them. They've said, that's great. I don't have to, sit through, maybe an hour or more
Yeah.
before I get to my item, so.
Sure.
Legal look this over?
We haven't, it's not been put in any kind of a draft form, it's just,
We
these
all
were
go
just
like this.
thoughts.
Yeah, no, so I'll definitely be working with Adam and Liz on this. I think there's definitely some items that this will make sense, and then there's some other items that we'll have to tread carefully and make sure. For instance, like public hearings, and I think Adam spoke to this. I mean, we are required to have public hearings. And so, but I don't see any reason why we couldn't have, does anyone have any comments about this? Open the public hearing for this, blah, 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 blah. And instead of you guys making 5 separate motions,
Yeah.
you can make one motion for all of the 5 public hearings you just had, unless you need to break them out or something like that. But Adam and Liz and I will all touch base and figure out when it's appropriate and when it wouldn't be.
So tonight it would have been appropriate? Pretty much?
For a combined motion,
For a
I
combined motion.
don't see a problem with it.
Yeah, I wouldn't either.
My,
tonight.
my knee-jerk reaction, though, is that you would still have had to go through the steps of saying, for this conditional use permit, we're opening the public hearing
Yes.
and
Right,
closing the public
right.
hearing, and now we're moving to the next one, closing, and so on. And then you would probably be able to make one combined motion at the end, though, for all 4 of these projects that we heard tonight, we're approving them with the staff's recommendations, conditions.
So on the ones that we do, the conditional use permits down here that are all the same, could we open up a mass public hearing?
Do more than 5
You
at
mean-
a time.
Same
Over by Zion's?
So I would,
Oh, yeah.
I need to look into that. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Um,
Jordan loves areas.
That
Oh,
Jordan
the
loves
Jordan
is so
loves
So-
so.
I think we did 11
thing over and over and over.
And it's the same
And,
thing
and I
over.
think there will be some changes, so we're currently working on, an updated subdivision ordinance that's gonna change the process for that. Whether or not it's removing the public hearing,
I don't mind removing, yeah.
Yeah, it's important.
yeah.
But I was
So,
thinking
so,
we could combine
but,
them.
but you'd have, currently, because it's, each of those is a separate plat,
Right.
it would require, like we had before, 14 or 15 public hearings because we're talking about each plat individually, and there's not a mechanism to combine those to be considered as a whole. That's one thing that I'm currently looking at. I know Adam's looked at it, Alex was looking at it before that, and we've had another consultant help us with that as well, who, she's presented here, right? No, she hasn't. Okay, so we've got a lot of people much smarter than I am who've looked at this. If there's a mechanism that we can do that, because I think that makes sense, we'll definitely go that direction. If state law is saying, no, each plat is a separate thing, there may not be a way to work around that.
We could do one motion. We could open the public hearing, close the public hearing, open, close, and then do one motion for all of them together.
As far as I
really
know,
good for the
as
plat,
far
don't
as I know, yes.
So that would save some time.
Yeah, so instead of 15 motions,
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
And there's certain developers that might want not to be on that list. I know there's been projects that I pushed through that I want the neighbors to be in my favor.
yeah. So, yeah, I mean, these are all different things that would need to be looked at. I mean, my assumption is administrative actions, especially as we work through some of the way that we're procedurally handling them, would probably easily make it to the consent agenda in some way, shape, or form. You're probably not gonna ever see a legislative action though. So a rezone request, anything like that. We want you to be putting your input. We want you to be saying, is this meet these conditions and whatnot, and those you'll never see on the consent agenda.
I wouldn't want that, I don't know.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't,
No, those are, yeah. Kate, does that work with you as far as documentation?
Yes.
Okay.
So when I'm voting on something, I can't just say I vote no because it's ugly?
Wow.
We'll talk about that a little bit tonight.
Yeah, because that's next up
Yep. That just led right into the next agenda
Garrett
item.
will now give us some land use
Way
training.
to segue.
I know, that was very nice, thank you.
Everybody's still on record.
I hope so. You act like I care.
All right, so
I hope you have pictures today. Makes it,
He had pictures, he had gifts last time.
Yeah, he had fun things
it's
last time.
gonna be just as riveting as
Oh,
it was in
awesome,
September.
I can hardly wait.
I know. All of you were probably so excited when you saw the agenda. And sorry,
I
bear
just feel
with
bad
me,
I
I've
missed
got,
it.
oh, you can catch it on YouTube, that's the beauty.
Do you go there and watch it over and over?
It's a great way to put you to sleep if
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
having any sort of,
Problems with that? Okay.
exactly, different than counting sheep. So, so for those who did have to suffer through this last time, I'm sorry if I made you cry. One of the things that Liz brought up as we were talking about some of the procedural things, and I appreciate her doing this, was the importance of findings. So a lot of times, I mean, as you know in your motions, you're saying, I move that we approve, or I move that we deny, or whatever it may be, and then generally you're saying based on the staff's findings and recommendations or conditions or whatever those statements are. So the findings, so we talked about that the record needs to inform your decision. So whatever facts that you're gathering, whether it's from the public, yourself, from staff, need to inform that final motion and decision. One of the important things that happens in between the fact finding and the decision making is putting on the record what your findings are. So, for instance, in the conditional use permits that you approved tonight, Liz has, I think Adam and Liz have done their staff reports differently than Alex and Jason did, and have more clearly pulled out those findings that you're saying. this specifically meets this requirement of the ordinance, this specifically meets this.
And
We're
I
not
re-
finding
I really
safety
appreciated
issues.
that.
Yeah.
It was much easier to,
A lot quicker.
yeah, it was a lot
Yeah.
ejier to follow along and make sure we weren't looking at anything.
Yeah,
we
so,
needed to do.
oh, I apologize, Chair.
Oh, no, go ahead. I just wanted to say I really appreciated the way the new staff report was done.
So, and again, compliments to them for doing that, so that way it's a little bit more clear what you're doing. One of the things to keep in mind, though, is if you disagree with staff, they are providing findings based on the motion that they're recommending. So if you say we're not going with the recommended motion, it means that you're gonna have to you're gonna have to make your own findings. So you may agree with 7 of the 8 findings, and you can say that, and then say, but I find that this application is deficient in this, or whatever it may be. Or if a rezone application comes before you, say, I find that it meets this requirement or this requirement, but it doesn't meet this requirement. And that's something that you'll need to make on the record, so that way when someone's going back, they're not just reading, here's a bunch of statements, and then we have the commission saying, I move that we approve or don't approve or whatever it may be that's contrary to the staff's recommendation, but without any sort of simplified factual statements that support that motion, if that makes sense. So, this has been something that, I mean, I wasn't initially thinking of, so gratefully Liz was though, and said it's really important for us to make sure that, especially for Kate's job afterwards, that she's not sitting there saying, I really don't know how we got from this discussion to this motion, and I don't know, it's not Kate's job to put words in your mouth of why you did what you did. So, not that it happens all that often. I think generally the staff has hopefully is providing pretty good recommendations to you as a commission that, but there are times, as I understand it, that there may be projects that Adam and Liz are going to be coming to you with even a neutral recommendation saying, we're not telling you, whatever you guys decide to do, there's reasons that you might decide to do that. So whatever path you choose to do, you're gonna need to make your own findings. So whether it's a controversial project that they're saying, maybe this does meet the rezone thing, or maybe you feel that it doesn't, whatever you decide, just make sure you have those findings.
So if that, on a roll call, if the person making the motion said yes, but I'm thinking no.
So you would still make your vote however you want. This would be the person making the motion saying, I move that we approve, or whatever it may be, and I find X, Y, Z, that support my motion. And then someone would second it, and then there would be that roll call vote. So if you agree with that motion and those findings, you would vote yes. If you don't agree, you'd vote no.
So just because you're saying no, you don't have to give reason why at that point?
No, it's only the motion. So whatever the motion is, that's what's gonna be going on the record of, and that's why we need those findings.
So I can only see a scenario where you'd say, oh, they didn't meet this requirement, where I could say, if you look at the parking closer, you'll notice that there's nowhere for car 2 to park anywhere. It can't be on the street, so we need to, so
Yeah.
that would be valid,
Absolutely. So if, for whatever reason, a member of staff misses something,
right?
or accidentally copy and paste the wrong recommendation over or something like that, and you're like, I'm only counting 3 parking spots, and for a duplex, it requires 2 for each. You can make that motion, say, I move that we approve with the condition that they add a parking spot or whatever, or I move that we deny it. and I find that it meets these parts of staff's findings, but it doesn't meet this finding.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay. So now we move to even more fun stuff, all the things that I get stressed about. So you guys have probably heard of the Fair Housing Act. It's part of the Civil Rights Act of 1968. This particular act made it illegal to discriminate based on certain classes. With the Fair Housing Act provision, it made it illegal to discriminate in housing or housing-related transactions. So anything from you approving a renter, you entering a lease, you purchasing property, or anything in between, based on race, color, religion, national origin, sex, disability, and family status. Now, you might think this is kind of a weird thing to be discussing at our level, because you're not involved in housing, you're not building a house, you're not entering a mortgage, you're not doing any of those things. And generally, for the most part, a lot of comments made either at this dais or in your position don't generally touch one of those in an overt way. The reason that we bring it up, though, is because, for instance, there's cases out there that say if a city bans all multifamily housing and says we will not allow any sort of apartment complexes, because that has an indirect effect on people in these groups that generally, for socioeconomic reasons, may be more likely to be in that type of housing. That's been found to be discriminatory, and because that's an action that the city is taking that impacts housing or those housing-related transactions, that the city is found liable under the Fair Housing Act. Other ways that that happens is with some of the other comments that you've probably heard during your time on the Planning Commission that are not necessarily saying something about someone's color, but a stereotype related to someone's color or whatever it may be. And those things, if we take those and put those on the record of we're not approving this duplex because, you know, someone doesn't want to smell a particular type of cultural food or whatever it may be, that's a form of discrimination under the Fair Housing Act. So your decisions matter as a planning commission. I know sometimes it feels, I know there's sometimes it may feel like you're rubber stamping whatever staff brings to you, especially with administrative decisions, where they're saying, we've reviewed this and it meets all of these requirements and we're asking you to just say yes, which you're required to do by law, as we've talked about. When you choose to ignore that law, one, you are breaking the law. So, two, you're exposing the city to liability. But three, as we've talked about, especially in the last training, every decision that you're making is related to someone's property rights, which are guaranteed by the Constitution. So when you're telling someone no because you don't like something or you think the city made a mistake in the way that their ordinance was approved or is enacted or whatever it may be, understand that you may be violating someone's property, their constitutional right, when you don't follow the law. And even though that this body generally isn't the final say in certain decisions, and some things it is, especially those administrative decisions, these conditional uses, well, and I'm gonna let Adam and Liz correct me. I think for the most part, a lot of these, you are the final word on a lot of these administrative decisions. There are some, like subdivisions and whatnot, that the city council will still approve, but for conditional use permits, if I remember correctly, you guys are it. With legislative things, obviously it still goes somewhere else. but your decisions still have an impact if you load the record with something that's illegal. If you make an illegal decision, you open up the city to liability. One of the things that you were required to do when you were appointed to this was agree to follow the law and to fulfill your role, even when it's not popular, even when you disagree with it. And it's part of the reason that you are appointed rather than elected. We don't want you as a body feeling the pressure that your constituents are gonna hate you if you make the right decision. We want you to be able to make the right decision without being nervous that you're not gonna be elected in 4 years. And if there are those problems, I don't have the ability to kick you off the planning commission. The chair doesn't have the ability to kick you off the planning commission. Adam doesn't have the ability to kick you off the planning commission. But we will have the responsibility to let the city council know, and they and the mayor can remove you from the planning commission. So, yeah, sorry, go ahead,
Can I
Chair.
just ask a question? So I know that we've had things in the past come to us that we don't like, but that we have to approve because it meets all the parameters that it needs to. Can we say when we're doing our vote, I don't like this development, but I'm voting yes on this because it meets all the criteria? Can you say that or not?
You can. I mean,
Okay.
everyone's getting what they want out of it.
Okay, I just wanted to clear that
If,
up. That
if I could offer as the legal person, my preference would be that you approve it, and then after the fact, say this is approved, and then say, can we put this on as a discussion item on the next agenda so that we can discuss future applications like
Okay.
this with the staff?
That
And,
works.
and then in that next meeting, when it's on the agenda as, here is my problem with this particular item, we as staff want that feedback. And you can tell us specifically what changes you want made. Obviously, we would need to go to city council for their approval to allow us to spend time. I'm gonna guess though, if the planning commission is saying that this is a problem, the city council is also gonna feel like it's a problem.
Because
And-
we've had some of those in the past that we.
Don't point at me.
Well, no, not just you. Me too. We've all had that,
Yeah.
that things that we'd have to approve that we don't like, and we'd like to be able to not have those things come into our city. So that's very good to know that we can do that and bring that up and.
Yeah, so like we talked about in our last meeting, you as the planning commission, one of your roles is to help drive planning and zoning decisions in the city and to give that feedback to staff. And that's one of the things we encourage you to do. So you set your own agendas, and that's part of the reason I would prefer you not to put on the record connected with a particular project that you hate that project.
Okay.
Just in case there's any hiccups, my preference would be for a judge not to be pulling the record and be like, oh my gosh, look at how negative this is, even though it had to be approved. That just adds fuel to the fire and has us lose the ability to have any sort of credibility of like, we know the planning decision felt this way, but staff still did everything they could to approve whatever. If we put it on as a different discussion item though, there's that distance of provide that feedback, help us understand what would make Midvale a better place to live, somewhere these developments happening in a way that you would prefer, but then it's not attached to a potential litigation claim.
I always feel like I don't have a say in it. You
And
know,
it-
like you're saying.
Could you say after, like you said, that you didn't like it or that it needs discussion, could you invite public back to discuss? Because a lot of times I feel like we're voting yes. They're
public's
out
saying-
there yelling at us, why are you saying yes? Doesn't
Yeah.
our voice matter?
So that would be something, again, make your vote, and then at the end of the meeting, when it's talking about future projects or things like that, future agendas, to ask staff, this was a controversial item. I know the public had a lot of things to say about it. I have some feelings that may be similar. Can we put this on the agenda to discuss at the next meeting? And then we can put it on there as a discussion item. Whether, that's up to you. I mean, the only time you're ever required, and we'll get to this later, and so I'm gonna address it now because this is your question. If later I bore you again, I apologize. The only thing that's required to be open to the public are public hearings. Discussion items like that, if you're gonna discuss it as a planning commission, they don't have to be open to the public or open for public comment. They just have to be open so that the public can hear the discussion and the debate that you're having. But if you choose to open it up to public comment and allow the public to do that, you absolutely can, and that's the choice that you make as a body to open it up to that. But so individually, you can't make those calls, like, it requires a vote of the entire commission.
But usually if we're in that position, we're all pretty much on the same page.
Yeah.
Generally.
I mean, there were some things where the public was so upset. I had people stop me when I've been to grocery stores.
Why did you let that go through?
Oh, yeah, or thank you for sticking up for me, because you just feel like they don't have a say, and they're very frustrated by it.
Yeah, so
When you've got a flat roof building coming in and they don't like it,
But our hands are tied.
yeah, I mean, and do you remember that one on 7200?
Oh, yeah,
It was
yeah,
awful.
it
I
was
had
awful.
people come up to me.
Well, we
and-
did push it off a few times.
Oh, and it still looks like crap,
Yeah,
but
it does, yeah.
So I just want to say something. So it sounds like if there's a huge outcry about something, it's not that project that instigated it necessarily, but projects going forward, which can be very difficult for the public to understand. Since I've been living here for 3 years, I've noticed that the public doesn't seem to think that we have a plan, even though we have a very planned out plan since a long time ago, 2016, and it's very well defined. So it's hard to get someone's butt in gear and say, if you have a problem, these are the people you need to go to, so we can discuss how to make it better for your life.
Yeah.
And I feel like we can do that as a body, but we're just a few people. And they're,
Even if we held like an open, once a month, an open public, where they can talk about anything on the agenda.
or at least show them what the master plan looks like. Like, there is a master plan that we
Yeah, I
are.
would think, maybe not once a month, but I would think that at
maybe
least,
quarterly.
yeah, maybe quarterly, we do an open meeting to discuss the master plan, because people, like you say, people don't realize that we have a master plan.
We actually have planned it.
Yeah, it's actually planned.
But I would say 9 out of 10 is probably steep, but 8 out of 10 don't even know what a master plan is.
Oh,
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
I
Wouldn't it
totally
be nice
agree.
to put it out on social media
Nor do they
though?
care until they have that building.
Until they have something they
Until
don't
the
like.
tax,
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm bringing it up just because I feel like education could really help with some of the outcry that goes on. And I don't know if that's our responsibility. If it is, I'm more than willing to help out. But I come from a different background than a lot of people here. And I know that staff's already overwhelmed, so, yeah, you laugh. I know you are.
So a lot of that is, again, it's up to you, as you set the
Yeah.
agenda. So if you're wanting to say, Adam, we're requesting, or Elizabeth, we're requesting that you put on this quarter either a training or something about the general plan, you can certainly ask them to do that.
So we could say, let's say we decide that we want to go ahead with this. Adam, let's put this out, that we're going to have a meeting, let's say, to inform the public and say, do you want to know what the planning commission does? If you do, come to this meeting. We'll let you know what our job is and what we do. I think people don't realize what it is exactly that we do.
And couldn't we make that like a workshop
Yeah, I was just
meeting
gonna
instead
say
of,
a workshop
instead of having
involving
it be
staff.
and I think the other issue is with the community, they don't understand what our duties are
Right.
as planning commissioners. And I think that needs to be addressed also with the community.
So could we do something quarterly, say equinox and solstices around there, because that's quarterly? And then at least have kind of a framework around that,
Are you okay with that, to do something like that?
giving you more work?
Yeah, just do a workshop meeting and put it out there that public is invited to the workshop meeting and this is what we're gonna discuss.
Voice
And
your
let's
opinion,
try it a couple
hear-
times
yeah.
and
I'd
see
like to
if,
hear from the public.
yeah, see if anyone shows up,
Right.
you know?
I think
We-
that's a good
We
idea.
may
We've
have,
taken over your meeting.
Oh, please, this is the point of planning commission. I would love if you guys just want to say, Garrett, you're done.
Sit down.
no,
Cool.
but I,
So
I just think it's
one
good
thing
because I do feel like people look at us like, we just told you we didn't want this, but yet
And
you
you
said
just,
yes.
yeah,
So why am I here?
So one thing I would caution at this point is what's on the agenda, and I'm gonna sound like a broken record because we're gonna talk about this later as well. What's on the agenda is this training. So it sounds like, though, if you wanna interrupt this training and make a motion to discuss this further and brainstorm, fill out some of these details, it probably would be inappropriate to get so far down the road right now that you're discussing something
We
that
need
the
to get back
public
to
isn't
training.
aware of.
Yeah.
Yeah, but if you guys want to make that request of Adam or Liz to put that on the agenda, like the next agenda as a discussion item of how you'd like the public, it sounds like, if I can consolidate this a little bit, public engagement or public education portion, would you like that on the next agenda or a future agenda?
does someone wanna make a motion for that? We need to do a formal motion.
Solstice, you're on it. You're on it.
I move that we make an agenda item for the next meeting to discuss public engagement for education on planning commission goings-on.
Second.
Okay.
planning commission roles.
Yeah, there we go.
Can we get a roll call vote, please?
Yes. Vice Chair Anderson,
Yes.
Commissioner Erickson,
Yes.
Commissioner Snell,
Yes.
Commissioner Benson.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, perfect. So I'm sorry to interrupt and be this guy that makes everyone feel this way. So we're gonna get a little bit later in here again. I'm gonna talk about a little bit why I interrupted and had you make the motion, so that way you can do that. So we're gonna backtrack a little bit and go back to some of the legal considerations. And then, so we'll do these hypotheticals that I know everyone loves. So developer has submitted an application to rezone a property from single-family to RM25. The proposal includes a number of affordable housing units. The project has left you with a number of legitimate concerns about traffic, the proposed driveway locations, and the incapability with the surroundings. Sorry, that could be phrased better. Incompatibility, it's been a long day, I'm sorry, with the surrounding neighborhood. The audience has not brought up any of these concerns. Instead, they've made subtle and even openly discriminatory comments about the possible residents' color, race, national origin, religion, and family status. Because this is a legislative decision, can you deny this application?
No.
Yes,
Yes.
Off of.
because of the proposed driveway locations and,
Oh, yeah.
yeah, you could do it that, the traffic in the driveway, but you couldn't do it any other way. That's the only way, just because somebody doesn't like it, you can't do it. I learned that the hard way.
So if you were to play this out, what steps would you take as a commission to do that then?
Now that you just told us about the motion, you'd make a motion denying it based upon A, B, and C.
Okay,
It meets the criteria of this and this, but it doesn't for this and this. So you could base it off of.
so those are correct answers. And then I'm gonna add one thing that I would propose doing to make this go a little bit smoother, at least record-wise. So the answer is probably, depending on how ugly those comments are. If it's one thing, so I would recommend closing the public hearing and then tabling the decision to another time. And the reason is to allow you to essentially clean the record a little bit, that when you bring the decision back to be made, that you can fill the findings with those legitimate things and say, we as a planning commission are making this because of those three things, and not all of these things that the record's gonna be filled with in the
So
previous
you could
meeting.
table that
Yeah.
and come back.
Developer's gonna kill you, but.
He may, but,
It's his fault.
I mean,
Well, not always.
ultimately though, I mean,
Okay.
this one, you're gonna, you get the denial that you want for the legitimate reasons, but you distance yourself from all the illegitimate reasons that were put out there, all the
It clears
problematic.
the water.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's not perfect. I mean, the record is read as a whole of all these different meetings, but at least when you're making the decision, the findings that are gonna be on the record are not gonna be clouded with a bunch of comments.
Right.
Now,
Well, it cools the climate down too as well. So the next time you have it, people have had a chance to cool down a little
Not
bit.
in the moment.
and if you, depending on how ugly the comments are though, I mean, if they're really bad, the public may unknowingly be backing you into a corner that the only safe out is to approve. I mean, if the record is that ugly that there's not really any way that you can separate it from it, you may open up the city to liability because it may just look like that this is a discriminatory decision. Even though it's legislative, even though you have the power to say no, if those things are that bad, you may have to approve to avoid being sued.
So if this was a little different and the developer met all the requirements, but we had the hay, could we still table it?
You can table whenever you want.
But you have to, but then we have to
But
say
do
the
we
next
need a-
time we have a discussion and
Do we have
it's
to have a
because of A
reason
and
to
B.
table?
I would prefer it, but that's not in the rules. I mean, you can table it, you can table any item on the agenda. I would prefer you to say, like the last time that it was tabled, the public has provided some comments, the applicant's not here to answer them, let's table this so that they can be addressed. I mean, I might say, we're moving to table this to consider some of the public comments and to take further look before we make a decision. And so we're gonna table this to another meeting. And I think that's a completely legitimate reason. You don't have to be forced just because it's on the agenda to make a knee-jerk reaction. I would also, if any of you are brave enough, I mean, I will do my best to do what I can, but generally, attorneys are attorneys, they're the most hated people in the room. When it's coming from someone like you who's sitting on the dais and reminding people that you can't take into consideration some of the things that they're saying, or asking them to stop making discriminatory comments.
I'm not afraid to do that.
Yeah, I know.
So,
Me too.
I mean, there may be times that you're afraid that you're taking your life in your own hands. I'm not asking you to do that. But if there are things that, at least one story that was told to me when I first started is that there was a project here for multifamily housing. There was an affordable housing component, and at least one person came and said, we already have enough taco stands in Midvale. We don't need to do that. That would be one of those, like I said, that would be discriminatory, and it would be appreciated if someone, like I said, if I were present, I would probably ask them to say, I would say, the planning commission cannot consider that, and please refrain from further comments along that line, but it would also be appreciated if you as the planning commission remind them that's not something you can take into consideration, and it's also not appropriate. So you guys never deal with this because we have a hearing officer, but just so you understand what happens if there is a denial, whether it's at the staff level or something like that. So this only comes to administrative decisions. Legislative decisions are not appealable, but administrative decisions, if someone feels they've been wrongly denied, we have a hearing officer who takes into all of this, and he's the one to decide, did the city make the wrong decision? Most of the time that this happens, it's at a staff level that someone's saying Adam or Liz or someone else didn't give an administrative approval when they're supposed to. And so that hearing officer has somewhat of an informal court hearing, if you will, where they collect evidence, they look at the law, they take everything into account, and then they issue a ruling later that the parties are expected to abide by. If that gets appealed, it goes to district court and whatnot. So now we're going to get to everyone else's favorite part, ethics. So we talked about this last time, that your role as a planning commission is to be objective. And it means setting aside some of your own personal biases so that your decisions are fair and you don't violate that role. Again, like we discussed last time, this isn't to say that you need to agree with your fellow commissioners. We're not seeking for all of you to be cookie cutters of this is how we feel or whatnot. But it is to say, if you have some of those biases against certain groups or certain preconceptions about certain types of development or certain types of planning or zoning, that you're willing to put those aside, have an open mind, and make the decisions based on the objective, unbiased things in front of you. And even with that, some of you are going to disagree with each other of saying, I love the future of this, like I love where the general plan is taking us. And some of you may feel like, I don't feel like this works, or I don't feel like this part of the zone works. And that's great. That's why we have all of you. And that's why each of you is coming from a different background to be able to bring some of your experience and expertise to the entire group, to let them know, this is why I feel this way, this is why I feel that way. Now, obviously, personal bias undermines public trust. So if you're saying things, I hate all, fill in the blank of, I hate all single-family housing, that's not helpful. I hate all multifamily housing, also not helpful. I hate business, not helpful. So again, and when the public hears statements like that, they're going to generalize that to all of you and potentially the staff in the city. And so again, as much as I'm not asking you to stop being you, and I don't think any of you have this problem, but if you feel like an intense urge about something, to just say, is this a bias, or is this something that I really think is bad for the city? Because like the public engagement thing, is that a bias? No, I think that's something that you guys are passionate about, that you want people to understand what you're doing, and that absolutely can be discussed. If you're saying, I hate all fences that are white and picket, just saying. So this obviously probably comes as no surprise, but as planning commissioners, and I'm hoping that none of you have ever been in this position, there are no perks. So you can't use this position for personal gain. I'm not aware of any confidential information that's brought to you. But in case there ever is a time in which maybe you're invited to a closed session with the city council of saying, we're looking at purchasing property in this neighborhood in order to put in a new park or a new public building or something like that, and they're wanting your input on that, you're not allowed to take that confidential information and then go to the existing homeowners and say, hey, I want to buy your house, because I know the property value's gonna jump right now. You also can't provide that to anyone else, so you can't go tell your spouse, hey, I get in trouble if I do it, but if you do it in your name, we're good. No. You can't get special privileges or exemptions for yourself. You shouldn't be receiving or soliciting either directly or indirectly gifts or things along those lines. These are criminal if you violate them. I would say more than likely where politicians are going to be involved in making the decisions of whether or not you're charged, it's probably in their best interest to their constituents to see that you're held accountable for misusing your role.
I'm always glad I don't get run over in the parking lot.
There goes my speeding ticket.
So the conflicts of interest get laid out under the Municipal Officers Employees Ethics Act. It requires you to make certain disclosures. So these things, if you disclose and you recuse yourself, you're not violating any law. You're following the law and you can continue to remain on the Planning Commission. So if you're assisting someone with a transaction with the city for compensation, in other words, if someone hires you to come lobby for them or something like that, or maybe in your own personal business, you're working on a project that is happening in Midvale City. So your employer is building a development or is consulting on a project or whatever it may be, you'll be required to disclose that. Having an interest in a business entity regulated by the city, having an interest in a business entity doing business with the city, or having an investment that creates a conflict between you and your personal interest or your public duties. So things like maybe you own stock. I'm not even sure if it's a publicly traded company. I'm just throwing this out here. Maybe you own stock in Topgolf. That would be something you would need to disclose. And again, not only do you have to disclose it to the city beforehand in writing, anytime something that, any one of these conflicts, if it comes up in a meeting, you're required at the beginning of the public meeting to disclose it, and then you're required to recuse yourself when that agenda item comes up, which means that you leave the room. So that way the rest of the Planning Commission isn't sitting there watching your facial expressions of like, yeah, no. And again, this is not a may, so any prosecutor or whatnot, or the city council or mayor, it's not a may remove you from office, it's a shall remove you from office. So if you violate these, you're automatically out. You may end up seeing criminal penalties. The conflicts of interest provision that you guys have adopted, though, within your bylaws is a little broader than what the state requires. So if you're receiving any of the things that are read here, conflict of interest is generally defined as gaining a private benefit, either directly or indirectly, or material personal gain or advantage for oneself and to one's relatives, friends, employers, businesses, investments, groups, or associations, etc. Under these situations, so like if you have a family member who's coming to present something in front of the Planning Commission, you need to again say that at the you don't need to disclose this to the city up front, but if it comes up on an agenda, you need to say, this person is my relative, I'm disclosing that I have a conflict of interest with this, and then when that agenda item comes up, you'll again leave the room so that there's not that.
No matter what the agenda item is.
So just for that agenda item. So
Well, that's
like,
fine.
so if
like
they're,
my kids bought my dad's house, and they're gonna come and rezone for multi-unit in there. So I need to,
so you would need to say, these are my children, because there's a conflict of interest. I'm disclosing that. You'll do that at the beginning of the meeting.
Okay.
And then when that agenda item is called, you're saying, I'm recusing myself. You'll leave the room that way again, so no one
Right.
can see what
Okay.
you're saying or doing. You won't be able to participate in the vote.
Sure.
And then when that agenda item closes, one of the staff members will go get you,
Okay.
and the meeting will continue.
Okay, thanks.
One of the ways that we end up with sometimes issues with conflicts of interest are when we're gathering information from outside of these public hearings, or when you're having conversations with neighbors or things that are coming up that are on upcoming agendas. So these ex parte communications. These conversations where people see you having them or overhear you having them undermine the trust, making them feel like decisions are being made outside of the public, if that makes sense. And making them believe that you're somehow biased, or maybe you're revealing what your personal feelings are before you've heard the entire thing. So we encourage, one, you're required under your bylaws not to engage in these types of conversations, but two, this is one of those wonderful opportunities that you can reframe it and say, I'm so glad you're passionate about this. This is coming up on this agenda, in 2 weeks or whatever. Please come, please express yourself during that public hearing. We want to hear from you, and we want it on the record, so that way it can inform our decision, or we can consider it. Any questions about that one? Okay. So now there's going to be some ethical gray areas, and we've tried to, in the bylaws, if you believe that there's going to be some sort of feeling that you can't be impartial because of some sort of relationship. So, we've talked about specific economic interests you may have. We've talked about maybe family members or something like that. But where does like an old friend fall into? Someone you grew up with, but you haven't been in contact with whatever. Or maybe a neighbor that you're close with, but more than acquaintance, less than a friend, that sort of thing that may be publicly known. We ask that you abstain from voting if you feel that you can't be impartial. So if you feel like that relationship is gonna either be perceived, or that you feel yourself that you're not gonna be able to be impartial in that decision, we ask you to abstain, which simply means that you're not gonna vote. You can be present for the discussion, you can add your own 10 cents, just when the vote is taken, that you're not making a vote about the outcome of the decision, and you're leaving that to the rest of the planning commission.
So when it comes to the vote, instead of saying yay or nay, you just say I abstain.
Exactly, and we'll need to have you disclose that for the record. Just say, I don't feel that I can be impartial because of this relationship with this person, or I don't feel that the public would perceive that this is an impartial decision because of my relationship with this person, or whatever it may be. Maybe it's, I don't know if anyone here is a Mason, but saying, I'm a Mason, they're a Mason, I'm seeing their pin, I don't want this perceived as me doing a solid for someone that I associate with. Okay, so some more hypotheticals, now that I'm seeing half of the staff falling asleep at least. So in your personal work, you work as an architect. A company has hired your company to design the new homes for development in Midvale. The project will require direct communication with the building official and the planning director. Normally, your company is good about letting you avoid these types of direct conflicts, but they're swamped right now and need you to get the project done. What do you do?
Come and talk to you.
Yes, that is always, you absolutely can, and we'll figure it out.
Yeah. That's the only thing I could think of.
There's a
really.
great disclosure form, I filled it out.
Did you?
Yeah, and I sent it to
You didn't
people.
let me know.
Yeah, and they said, good to go.
Okay.
There's also a form, yeah.
Really, if you have any question about it, wouldn't you just call down here and say, hey, I need to talk to somebody about this, I got this coming up? That way you'd be covered.
Yeah, and part of the reason we're also doing, so that's absolutely a right answer, almost all of these. I mean, if you ever have a question about, like, what is this on the agenda? What are we approving? What's going on?
Right.
Ethical things, open public meeting questions, whatever it may be. We as staff are here to support you and to help you navigate through all those. So yes, that is a correct answer. Part of the reason we're going through these hypotheticals, though, is so that way you're training your mind to recognize that this is a conflict even in the first place. So let's assume staff is all sick with COVID, and we're all on ventilators, so we can't talk either.
Wow.
Yeah, we're going like
Poor
worst
guys.
case scenario.
Yeah, it's definitely worst case, yeah.
What should you do? So all of your resources are gone.
Wouldn't you just recuse yourself from the whole thing?
So this is one of those, because you have an economic interest, your business is doing business with the city and is involved with a transaction in the city. This is one that you need to immediately disclose to the city and let them know that you're assisting in that transaction. And that'll have to be done in writing. And then, like you said, when that project comes to the planning commission, you're gonna disclose it at the beginning of the meeting and then recuse yourself. So, okay, so you recently had an opportunity to become a silent partner in a small restaurant on the border of Sandy and Cottonwood Heights. The business books look great and the restaurant is loved by the community. You decide to invest. Do you have a duty to disclose your investment to the city, and if so, when? Is this from the one I sent 10 minutes before the meeting? Oh, thank you.
Is there something that states if it's so far from the Mid-Val that you do need to disclose it, like within a mile?
Nope.
No?
So if it's Sandy and Cottonwood, you wouldn't have anything to do with that.
Man, you guys are reading my mind tonight.
Maybe I
Thank you.
took this class
Like a year ago?
recently,
It was,
didn't I, Kate?
yeah, about a year ago. So yeah,
No, a few months ago,
absolutely,
I think.
Commissioner Benson, like you said, there is no rule requirement of a certain distance. You guys, this would not be regulated by Midvale. It doesn't involve Midvale, so you don't have to disclose it. I mean, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, only reason I brought that up, because I had to disclose when I became a member of this board that I had property invested in Murray within 1 mile of Midvale.
And
that was part of their requirements.
And maybe they're just, I mean, I don't do the disclosure forms.
Yeah.
So it may have been
So I
that they
just
were
wondered
just
if there
trying
was
to err on
something-
the side.
Yeah.
If we're going strictly by what the law requires, you wouldn't
Then
need to
you need
disclose
to.
that.
Right.
If for whatever reason you did move into Midvale though, open a second location, or maybe with how awesome our boundaries are, you decide to add an addition and move into Midvale, you would have to disclose at that point. And again, this is one of those, disclose immediately, has to be in writing, and then the same procedure for beginning of the meeting, and then recuse yourself.
Is there a blanket form that you'd fill out for like the year?
That's, at least for me, I know as an employee, I have to do it at the beginning of each year. I can't remember if it's the calendar year, the fiscal year that our HR department's running on, but I have to disclose all the same things. So if I end up purchasing property here in Midvale, even as a personal home, I have to disclose that I have a home here in Midvale. And if there were zoning decisions that were being made that affected me, I would have to recuse myself from even being able to provide advice to you, because it would impact, it could have an economic impact on the value of my property. So my assumption is you probably should have been provided some form that tries to capture all of that up front, and then you have an ongoing obligation to make sure that form remains current.
Being a builder developer,
If
pretty much everything we touch.
Yeah.
If you're doing work in Midvale, or you're based here out of Midvale or anything like that, you'd have to disclose that.
Probably need to talk.
Okay,
There's a nice form, it's in our handbook thing,
I think I did fill it out.
once, I've only
When
done
does
it once.
does it expire?
no.
It's
So
disclosed.
if you've done it once, you're probably good. You
Okay.
you'll just have that ongoing obligation, let's say if you open up a second property or something like that, to make sure that that form is current and that all those disclosures are
The
current.
intent's on file.
Yeah.
And then, again, any decisions that impact whatever that may be, you just need to disclose that conflict of interest here and then recuse yourself from those decisions. Any other questions? Okay. So a new project has been proposed on 700 West. Half the residents are thrilled, the other half are upset because they believe that it will negatively impact traffic in the surrounding neighborhoods. A neighbor begins casually discussing the project with you. They probably don't know you're on the planning commission and that the project is on next month's agenda. What do you do?
Tell them it's on the agenda and to come join.
Dun, dun, dun.
I think Commissioner Snow's doing the ethics training next year.
I actually had this kind of happen
Yeah.
on
Yeah, so have
Facebook.
I. Yeah, so
And
have I.
so I just said, I'm on the planning commission, and I said, if you have questions, please come to the meetings. And we love your input, and we've got some great developers, because they were asking about Maine. And I said, we've got some great developers, this will give you a chance to have some input. I'd encourage you to be in attendance to the meetings.
So kind.
That's why I think the workshop that we're touching on
Yeah.
is a good thing.
Yeah, no, and that's
They
perfect.
didn't answer me back.
And they probably didn't come either.
No, they didn't show up.
That's the dedication.
One of the things that I'd forgotten to mention is in our bylaws, the ex parte communication. So if someone's just like, Commissioner Anderson, I'm on your front door, you have to listen to me. Any of those types of interactions, you do need to disclose. And depending on the extent of that interaction, so if you engage with them, you may be asked to recuse yourself or whatnot, so there's not that, that sense. Or if everyone's saying, well, you did exactly what you're supposed to, of you stop them, you let them know who you are, you encourage them to come out and speak. I don't personally see that as you needing to recuse yourself. So depending on that level of engagement with your neighbor, I mean, if you're out there for 3 hours saying, yeah, I absolutely X, Y, and Z,
How deep you get.
that's gonna be problematic. A new project is being presented to the planning commission. You know that it's controversial, but you're genuinely excited for the project. You believe that it will kick off an additional economic, development in an identified opportunity area. During the presentation, you learned that your best friend when you were growing up is the owner of the company purchasing the project if it is developed. What do you do?
This happened with Zach, I believe.
Would you have to disclose that? I mean,
I think this happened when I first, like, my very first meeting, the very first architecture company that presented. I had worked for them, and I disclosed it, and then it was, we talked about it a little bit, and then it was, there's no way that they're influencing my decision.
Yeah,
Because it was
I
so
mean,
long ago.
So,
well, that's just it right here, your best
Yeah.
friend when you were growing up.
Right,
Jeez.
you wouldn't have,
I'm well past that point.
you wouldn't be invested anymore.
Most of my best friends are dead.
so I would err on the side of disclosing it, just like everyone's mentioned. Just, I mean, transparency, especially for public, is everyone's best friend. I don't think with it, if it's like, hey, we were in kindergarten when we were 5 and we threw rocks at each other and then we went our separate ways, I don't think that's gonna jeopardize your impartiality. I don't think that you need to abstain from voting. If there's something more significant than that of like, this is my best friend when I was growing up and we still get together like twice a year and our kids play together, that's when I would probably say it's probably wise to abstain from the vote. Or if it's even closer than that, maybe even recuse yourself.
Right. But it's best to err on the side of
Always,
disclosure.
always err on the side of disclosure. I think this is the last, how long have we been going, Matt?
Over an hour.
An hour? I'm so sorry.
Too
This
long.
was, oh gosh, this was supposed to be shorter than last
Go
meeting's
IT.
meeting, so. So, a friend of yours happens to be a developer. Since being appointed to the planning commission, they've begun treating you to Real Salt Lake games. You believe that their generosity has nothing to do with your position, and that the timing is just a coincidence since Real Salt Lake season started about the same time as your appointment. You estimate that the cost of your ticket is about $30. Can you accept their generosity?
Yes. It's under
Do
a
they have
certain
a
amount of
project?
money.
Do they have a project
Yeah, do they have a project
going in
or
Midvale?
coming up?
No?
I think it's $20, isn't
And
it?
you can
the
go.
cap?
Is it 20 or is it 30?
50.
Is
Yeah,
it 50?
I thought it was more.
I thought it was
50.
20.
I believe it's 50,
Yeah.
Oh, well, then load me up.
but if you're going every game,
Then
is
add-
is it $50 each game, or is it $50 total?
I don't think it matters until they have a pitch in Midvale.
So I don't have a good answer for you. This is one of those that something similar happened in the Utah County Attorney's Office, where some prosecutors and a defense attorney all were friends. They all loved the Jazz. They'd all go to games together. One of them would pay for parking, one of them would pay for food, and generally the defense attorney would pay for their tickets. So one was like kicking in $30, the other one's kicking in $30, and then the other one's kicking like $150. They ended up getting fired for ethical problems because of that. I would say if you're in that situation, I mean, it's really hard because the law isn't clear. Is it $50 total, or is it $50 per transaction, if you will? I don't know. I honestly think that the safest option is while you're on the planning commission, with them having the likelihood of bringing a project to Midvale, since like you said, a developer's a developer. If an opportunity presents itself, they're gonna take advantage of that opportunity. I would probably recommend, so long as you're on the planning commission, to either pay for yourself or reimburse them for the cost. So that way, if a project ever comes before them, before you, it doesn't look like they've been bribing you for a year and a half to get your vote.
Could you, in the alternative though, just recuse yourself from a project if it came forward and say, we're friends, we do things together?
So you will need to do that, but this is the
Would-
funky one of,
okay.
are you getting economic gain? Are you getting a perk because you sit on the planning
But
commission?
if you don't
then it
vote,
wouldn't matter.
then it's not really,
No.
I mean, I'm just saying, if you don't know that they're gonna bring anything,
Well,
if you went ahead and did this and then.
Well, you know they're courting you for that reason.
That's why
Well,
this
if
is
you know
a,
they're courting you for that reason, then definitely, yeah, but if you've been friends forever and
that's
it's
why
just
this
hard.
is a difficult
it's hard.
question. I don't have a good answer for you. This is just the safest way I know of moving forward. Like my brother-in-law, for instance, is an attorney. He works with, his partner that he works for does a lot of municipal bond underwriting and the legal stuff like that. We've had this conversation of like, how much can we give each other? How big of a Christmas gift can we give each other before we potentially have a problem? And I mean, jokingly, we've just said, why don't you keep your money, I'll keep my money, or I'll keep my Amazon gift card that was meant for you, you keep your Amazon gift card that was meant for me, and we'll call it even. I mean, we've never had that professional conflict, but it's one of those things that it's just a weird, I mean, we live in an interconnected world where we know lots of different people and we have lots of different relationships. Like I said, I don't have a good answer for you. I can only tell you that this would be probably the safest option that I can think of if you wanted to be in the safe zone. Now, I mean, you can imagine in 2 games, you're over that $50 amount, that are you getting economic gain where it's not clear? If you've been doing this like 20 years, that they're just like, look, I'm more wealthy than you are, and I want you to come enjoy the game with me, and you guys have been doing this for 20 years, I wouldn't be concerned about it. But if it's like this, where you've never done this before, you get appointed to the planning commission, and then suddenly you start getting treated to season tickets.
All of a sudden,
I don't
we've
know.
got friends,
So err on the side of caution.
That would be my preference
Yes,
as
to keep you happy.
as the attorney for Midvale.
They were all getting a gift card for $49.99.
And then one cent the rest of the year.
That's right.
So now you're through probably the most heavy stuff we're gonna discuss tonight. Now, we're gonna talk about Open Public Meetings Act. This is required by law that we go through it once a year. Some of this is gonna be really interesting, and some of it you're gonna be really grateful that staff stresses about this and not so much you. So the intent of the Open Public Meetings Act is to make sure that the public's business, which we're doing right now, is done in the public. That they know what deals are being done, that they know what discussions and deliberations are being done that are informing the ultimate decisions that impact them, whether it's laws, developments going in, all that sort of thing. You guys have now become more familiar with what an electronic meeting is than I ever imagined. I'd seen maybe 3 electronic meetings before COVID, and then everything became an electronic meeting for about 18 months. And so, I mean, I won't spend a whole lot of time on that. Teams, Zoom, anything like that. It does have to be noticed a little bit differently, where it's notifying the public that certain members who are making decisions are not physically going to be present. So they can't throw tomatoes at you or something like that. A meeting means any convening of a public body with a quorum present, whether it's a workshop, executive session, anything like that. And so this is one of those things that you have to be careful about, that it does say chance social things are not meetings, but if 3 of you are getting together to say, I think the planning commission needs to make some changes, and here's what I want to do, you now have a quorum, you're now discussing public business about a public body, and that's considered a meeting. And then quorum, simple majority of the membership of the body. In your case, it's 3, so 3 of 5. All notices have to be published at least 24 hours in advance. They have to include the date, time, place, and agenda for the meeting. There are some public notices that are required to be longer. So certain, I think it's rezone applications, things like that have to be published something like 14 days, 10 days? 10 days? Okay. So they have to be published in advance. Utah recently changed the law. This used to be done by mail. This used to be done by posting things on property or posting it in wonderful glass cabinets at the front of our building where the public saw all the time, and whatnot. Now, the large majority of these notices, so our city does things a little bit different than the law requires. We meet the minimum requirements of the law, which is we put it on a public notice website run by the state that anyone can access at any time. But we also, there are certain things that still get mailed out, and I think it's at 500 feet for most things now. So, and then the agenda has to specify the topics that are being considered at each meeting, and it has to be broken up. Each topic has to be broken up as an agenda item. So that's partially the reason why I interrupted you as we started talking about public engagement. That's not on tonight's agenda. The training is, but with you making the motion, it'll be on the next agenda to discuss, and then the public's gonna be aware of what you're talking about. And then the final thing, you can't take a final action unless it's on the agenda. So that discussion that you had was fine, making the motion was fine, but if you were to say, we're now gonna put this on our calendar of, here are the set dates of when we're gonna do these public engagement workshops or whatnot, that would have been inappropriate. We talked about ex parte communication. So not only is it a conflict of interest and undermines the public trust, but it also violates the intent of the Open Public Meetings Act. When you're doing your deal making, when you're collecting information about decisions that you're gonna make as a commission, and you're doing that behind closed doors, you're doing that with friends, you're doing it outside of the public eye, those are all, that violates the Open Public Meeting Act. If you're making text messages or emails or instant messaging during meetings and taking things that are not on the public record, that's a problem. One of the ways that every attorney kind of gets squeamish about is the meetings after meetings. So we adjourn this meeting, and then 3 of you go to a corner. Well, hypothetically, 3 members of a public body go to a corner and then say, hey, what did you think of that decision, or whatever it may be. You're still continuing discussing the public business, but now you're no longer doing it in a public meeting. Having the social things that you guys do all the time of saying, hey, did you try this restaurant, or how's work going, or whatever, absolutely fine, absolutely okay. If you start, then it's just when you start pulling up agenda items, whether it's that meeting or the future meeting or things that you're wanting to do as a commission, those all need to be done in the meeting itself. So we talked about this again with, I think it was Commissioner Snow's question of, does a discussion item have to be open to the public, or can we open it to the public? And so this public meeting, this is a public meeting we're in. It was posted and noticed. It's open to the public. It has that agenda, but it does not require you to open it to public input or comment. So we could have had like a workshop meeting where I just did this entire training. It's interactive between us. If someone in the public has a question, you don't have to open it up to them. You don't have to allow them to comment. A public hearing, though, is for a specific agenda item, and that's, each of those public hearing items is separately noticed generally. Posted notices, you must require reasonable opportunity for the public to provide input. So that doesn't mean that if you've been allowing public comment for 3 hours and you're hearing a lot of repetitive things, you don't have to necessarily keep the public hearing open so long as there's someone who wants to talk. You just have to provide a reasonable opportunity for the public to give their input. So if you've listened to 2 hours of we hate this project, you can say, we understand that you're not happy with this project. We feel like everyone's had a reasonable chance to be heard. We're gonna move to close the public hearing, even if there's still people who wanna be heard. You can put time limits on those comments. You can choose to accept written comments, and you can even choose to say, it looks like we have a ton of people here. We've already listened to about 2 hours of comment, and it still looks like a lot of other people want to talk. We're going to continue this public hearing to another meeting to allow for additional comment. And so the big difference between these two, public meeting is this entire thing we're doing, the entire agenda. Public hearing is specific to an agenda item. Closed meetings. So there are some times that it's acceptable to do closed meetings. These are very narrowly defined within the code. No decisions can be made in a closed meeting. I don't foresee any reason why we would ever close a meeting. but the only two that I could potentially see, if there's a discussion about someone's competence, physical or mental health, or their character, or if there's something going on with where I'm saying, whoa, we're way off track, can we close this for a second? And I need to inform you that the decision you're about to make is likely going to result in litigation, and then give you some legal counsel. Again, I don't think that will ever happen, but those are two reasons why we could have a closed meeting. Okay, so hypotheticals. During a public meeting, a resident identifies a particularly concerning loophole in the city zoning code. You are horrified because you know that there have been rumors about a project that could abuse this loophole in the works. A simple modification to the ordinance could close this loophole. The citizen is demanding immediate action. What can you do?
Tell them to get with their city council member.
It's true, yeah.
Or just like with our discussion during your presentation, suggest it be put on the agenda for the next meeting.
Reading my mind. So, it's not on the agenda, so you can't act on it that night. However, you can use the discretion to kind of, to fill that out a little bit more, understand exactly what you're gonna request to be put on the agenda item. You can make it known that you have concerns and make that known to staff. Staff can go up their separate paths to find out if that's gonna be something they need to spend some time on. And then, but yeah, that night, you can't say, I move that we adopt an ordinance that corrects, with this wording, that corrects that loophole. It would violate the Open Public Meetings Act. Okay, so developer has requested that the Planning Commission reduce a landscape buffer on its commercial project. The project has been controversial and has frustrated many neighbors. It has already been through a public hearing. The last thing the neighbors want is to have the buffer reduce. This type of request does not require a public hearing. At the meeting, comments are submitted and members of the public demand to be heard on the issue. What do you do?
Go home.
I think you can hear some comments and eventually table it, as you recommended earlier tonight, to
Well, the
separate.
developers requested that the planning commission reduce the landscape buffer.
Yeah,
Well, we already have it in place.
Right.
So, too
so,
bad.
so even though but to help calm the nerves of those in defiance,
But the developer might not be happy that you're opening public comment.
right?
So this is one of those that ultimately you choose what you want to do. That's why that line in there of it's already been through a public hearing is in there. The public has already had the chance to express their concerns. You've already heard those concerns. You're addressing an issue that doesn't require a public hearing. So the meeting has to be public, but the individual agenda item does not necessarily require you open for comment. So ultimately, that's up to you. If I personally would be a little bit concerned opening the meeting to something that you may not have the power to do, to accept comments on something you may not have the power to change, for instance.
Well, we just had this the other day too, where we had someone who wanted to make comments about something that had already been decided.
Yeah, the littering on the lot.
Yeah, and it was like, that's not what we're discussing here tonight. This is what we're discussing.
And so you'll have the best feel for whether or not, is this in the public's interest? Is this in the city's interest? Is this in everyone's interest to kind of reopen this? Or is this just going to open up a can of worms that people are going to feel even more frustrated to vent and then not feel like you guys listened to anything they said when you've already allowed for a time and place to allow them
So
to
if
do
we
that?
table it, it doesn't have to have another public hearing on it, right?
It doesn't require a public hearing, so any,
even have to table
any.
Yeah, you don't have
Yeah.
to.
any motion you move forward with doesn't require you to open it
Okay.
up. So I personally would err a little bit on the side of not opening it where it's not required. Because if you make a decision that the developer feels like was only because of the comments from that night or something, and you abused your discretion or something along those lines, this may be seen as that public clamor that we talked about last time of opening something up to just allow people to be angry, siding with the angry parties without legitimate findings to do what you're doing.
I will say at our last meeting, Candy handled it great, because there were a lot of upset people that had nothing to do with what we were approving, but
Yeah, that Center Street project, which we have no idea if, when, but, yeah.
it's tricky.
So, I know this is, again, your favorite position to be in of enforcing some of those. But I do want to I'm getting ahead of myself, sorry. So, some tools for difficult decisions. So like you said, I mean, sometimes you're gonna be stuck in these positions where you're gonna be asked to make a difficult decision on the spot, and you're thinking, I don't know the procedure, I don't know the ethical implications, I don't know the legal implications. Here are some things for your toolbox of how you can respond. So it's okay to stop, think about it. Silence is generally better on the record than a poor knee-jerk reaction of saying something that's potentially unethical, illegal, whatever it may be. So it's okay to just take a moment to sit there and think about it, and then think about your next action. Again, we've talked about this. That's why I'm here at these meetings, is for you to ask for my help. So if there's something that comes up, my responsibility is to help you figure that out. Sometimes I'm gonna know, sometimes it's gonna be an easy question of like, yeah, you're making $100,000 and you're working for this company, you need to go recuse yourself. Like, that's gonna be easy call for me. There's gonna be some, like the consent agenda and whatnot, that we as staff are working through, that I may have to ask you to, I'm gonna have to tell you, I need to research that. Let's either table it till the end of the meeting so I can sit there and jam out on my computer as quick as I can, or maybe table it to another meeting. And then that's the last thing. It's always okay to table the item. So tabling just means, it doesn't mean you're making a decision one way or the other, it's just buying yourself time. So if you think, I think I can figure this out by the end of the meeting, you have the ability to table it and move it later down on the agenda, saying, I know this is agenda item 3, we've heard all these things, I move that we table it and reconsider it after item 8, or whatever it may be. Or say, tabling it, I move that we table it to the next meeting and give yourself some time to think through that. Now, I won't get ahead of myself. Congratulations to you guys, you survived another fun, how many now? What's the time?
An hour and 31 minutes.
You've survived almost another 3 hours of training over 2 meetings, so you guys can all sleep soundly tonight. Okay?
Awesome.
Thank you. Our next item on our agenda is staff updates. Do you have anything to report to us?
So Liz and I are just working through the projects that we inherited as we started. And so we're coming up to speed with a lot of the code provisions. And so we're hoping, fingers crossed, that we're doing things right so far. We do have a few items coming up. Not necessarily the next meeting, but in November, we do have some coming forward. So, and we will brainstorm and talk about what we discussed earlier, that workshop, and kind of where to go with that. So, and if we have questions, don't be surprised if we send an email out with some clarifying questions, but we look forward to it.
Will there be a second meeting in October?
Right now, there's nothing on the agenda as far as projects go. So we may end up doing that workshop the next week, or the next meeting, if we can,
Sure.
group and figure out what we may want to talk about there.
Okay.
So, otherwise, we do have projects in November.
Sweet.
So,
But we'll only meet once in November, won't we? Will we meet?
Yeah, usually once in
Usually
November.
only meet once in November,
And
but it
December.
depends on, yeah,
Turkey
once-
Day.
Yeah.
depends on holidays. Commissioners, do you have anything that you'd like to discuss?
No.
Okay, with that, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move that we adjourn the meeting at 7:55 Mountain Standard Time.
All in favor?
Aye.
This meeting is adjourned.